So, as many of you guys know, I spent the beginning of my career at Wham going after child and family services, the child protective agencies, as you call them in the United States. I mostly focused on Manitoba, Canada, but the rest of the country as well. It totally depends on the story itself that I was dealing with at that moment. But I did a lot of that work for a long period of time because one thing people need to understand is that the child and family services system is absolutely disgusting. The way they treat children, it's a government coming in, kidnapping children, drugging many of them, diagnosing them all with different kinds of illnesses, most of them with illnesses really, and I've gotten that from whistleblowers as well, and then pumping them full of drugs. And then on top of that, we also know that the majority of people in care end up at huge risk and increased risk of rape, murder, theft, and being involved in doing those things as well. It is destroying families. If that's there to help children, then I don't know, maybe it's backwards day. It's absolutely disgusting. Child and family services is a horrible entity. And the things that I saw over the years, I confronted politicians. I went after the head of the, Child and Family Services on multiple occasions, several of them as they kind of went through the loops and everything. And it just got more and more clear to me that, yes, there's bad parents out there. Yes, there's irresponsible parents out there. But this organized crime racket coming and stealing children away from their families and making their lives terrible is just absolutely horrible. I'm going to get into this article right now. Out of the Winnipeg Sun, which says, children are going to die. Advocates report on Tina Fontaine urges changes. And Tina Fontaine was a really young woman, 15 years old, I believe. I've met multiple members of her family, and what happened to her was she was basically ignored and denied help by countless entities, most of them government. The police set her out on her own, and she got herself murdered. Someone murdered her after the police basically shoot her out in the streets. This CFS, which was caring for her, quote unquote, was basically completely irresponsible, something we see a lot. There's so many murders, and there's so many murders of Native American girls and boys in Canada. But anyway, so as the article goes into, Saging First Nation, Manitoba. An Indigenous teenager in Manitoba reached out for help multiple times in the weeks before she was found dead in a river, but was told there were no beds available, says a report into her death. The report by children's advocate Daphne Penrose said 15-year-old Tina Fontaine was essentially left homeless and at risk for sexual exploitation. Tina's death in August 2014 renewed calls for a national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and inspired volunteer groups such as the Bear Clan Patrol to protect the vulnerable on the streets. A 24-hour safe space for Winnipeg's youth was dedicated to her memory last May. And the Bear Clan are awesome. They're doing incredible voluntary work, surveying the streets as individuals to stop violence and people attacking each other. They are far more efficient than the police. Anyway. Then, as this article goes on to say, there were multiple signs the girl was spiraling downward and in danger of dying, but nothing was ever done, said Penrose. What's at stake are the lives of children. What's at stake are the children are going to die if we don't make changes, the advocate said as she released her report Tuesday on the Saging First Nation. They are going to die in this way if we don't get resources for them to access. I don't think that's necessarily the issue at hand, but we'll go into that in a moment. As the article continues, the advocate's investigation, which began last March, looked at records from the medical examiner, police health authorities, child welfare agencies, and others. It also included interviews with Tina's family and other community members. A representative for the teenager's family said Tina can finally rest in peace. The report details how Fontaine's family was affected by a history of residential schools, the 60s scoop, and child welfare agencies. Again, examples of the government coming in, stealing children, forcing children, indoctrinating children, pulling children from their real families, putting them in other ones, alienating them. And on top of that, it's this whole idea of, it takes a village to raise a family. No, it takes parents to raise a family. And stealing children away and traumatizing them is only going to make their life terrible. Many get out of it, but with that said, it is very difficult for those children. It's an increasingly difficult issue. As it goes into, she carried a burden that was not her own, Penrose said. Tina's mother was 17 years old and was still a child in care when Tina was born on New Year's Day in 1999. Both her parents struggled with addictions. 5 years later, her father asked Tina's great aunt, Thelma Favell, who I've met, a very nice woman, to take care of her and her siblings on the reserve northwest of Winnipeg. It was a relatively stable time in the young girl's life. That changed when Tina's father was murdered in 2011. Tina's caregiver tried to get help for the young girl from victim services, but because of questions about who was the teen's legal guardian, she never received counseling. In June 2014, Tina left to try to reconnect with her mother in Winnipeg. When Favell didn't hear from the girl, she called Child and Family Services for help. The report outlines how Tina's high-risk behavior rapidly escalated in her final 2 months. She disappeared, was homeless, developed addictions, and was sexually exploited. But she also reached out several times for help. On one occasion, Tina called Child and Family Services, but no one arranged to pick her up. Workers told the teen to ride her bicycle to a shelter. There was no evidence she arrived. For Tina, more than once in a matter of weeks, she was told there were no beds available for her, which essentially left her homeless and responsible to find her own place to stay, the report says. With nowhere to go, youth may be forced into sexual exploitation to have their basic needs met, it says. Sadly enough for children, when they are on the street, nothing comes free, Penrose said. The report says Tina disclosed her child welfare agency to her child welfare agency that she was hanging out with a 62-year-old meth-using man. Court heard during the second-degree murder trial of Raymond Cormier, who was acquitted last year in Tina's death, how the young girl was associating with the older man, and he admitted he was sexually attracted to her. Social workers believed Tina had been sexually assaulted, but the agency still dropped the teenager off with a contracted care worker at a downtown hotel. Tina walked away from the hotel shortly after. Just days later, her 72-pound body, wrapped in a duvet cover and weighed down by rocks, was pulled from the Red River. Penrose's report makes 5 recommendations. They include a plan to address children's mental health and a new response for at-risk and sexually exploited youth. So wait a second, this is the main issue I have with, there's many issues I have with this, but my main issue is that they're asking the government, this organized crime racket that steals children and traumatizes them, to give them mental health, help. First of all, don't put children in hotels. They were packing hotels filled with children because they're stealing so many children from their family. So many, it's insane. I believe 80,000 people when I last checked in 2014 or 2015. But they were putting them in hotels, packing them with hotels. They were not paying any attention to them. They were going off on their own. And they're traumatizing these children. And then they're like, we need to get them mental health help. So they're going to extort people more to fund this program instead of not creating the problem in the first place. It's so infuriating when we're talking about children, innocent human beings that are ripped away from their families, often moments after their families give birth to them, often from parents who don't have any history with drugs or might have smoked a joint once or twice or whatever. I believe there's a little girl named Baby Alexandria that I went into years ago, which is so disgusting, and she was put in a home with people who are already accused of rape and everything like that in the first place, and then she was murdered in a bathtub, just beaten to death, a baby, so sick. And these are the foster parents that they're putting. I'm not saying all foster parents are like that, and foster parents are in a situation where they're trying to help anyway, many of them. But it's just the fact that they steal these children away, and they stole them from parents that smoked a joint in a garage while she was in bed once. I mean, this is so absolutely disgusting. I don't know how anyone can see these stories and not be sick to their stomachs. How many children have been taken away, thrown in these situations, traumatized, molested, murdered, and then pushed out of the system the second they grow old and screw you. It's so insane, and so many of these people become statistics, and they end up statistics of not just being murdered, but being murderers, because children are warped by this horrible complex of government forcing them into these hotels and these people that don't care about them, never getting hugged, all that kind of stuff. It is disgusting. So when will we do something about this? I know I went after Greg Selinger, the Premier of Manitoba, the NDP Socialist Premier of Manitoba, before he was raising funding. He was doing horrible things. Kerry Irvin Ross, all these people. And then what happens? Well, the Conservatives get in, and Pallister comes in as the new Premier of Manitoba, and he raises spending into CFS. What happened? Why are people just staying apathetic to this? It's so disgusting. So people, not just in Manitoba, but throughout Canada, throughout the United States and elsewhere, need to stand up to this. You know how many parents have gag orders from not being able to talk about what they've witnessed and the horrible things that have happened to them and their children, including molestation, rape, all that kind of stuff, and being forced into the hands of the person who raped them? And these children have come forward, and then they just say that the other parent must have told them to say that and wave it off as these children are repeatedly molested. In cases, I have friends whose son, a friend whose son killed himself after all of this, and the government, oh, whatever, sorry. It's just the person actually that took the picture I showed earlier of me confronting Greg Selinger with a woman named Wendy Bocott, which I did a lot of activist work with years ago. But it's just so horrible when you hear these stories. The amount of stories, the amount of parents I spoke to, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of parents, it gets to the point where it makes you so sick you want to throw up. It's just, it weighs down on you after a while, and people need to do something about this. People need to stand up against this. These are children. This is a complex of extortion, theft, kidnapping, and murder. This is a complex of organized crime stealing children. If the Italian or Asian or Mexican mob stole your child, would you just we'll go and debate it in a courtroom, and they run the courtroom, so I guess that's not going to go anywhere good. I mean, would you, and maybe the police or the henchmen or the guys that go out and do the work, the dirty work for the organized crime racket, maybe they'll solve it. No. The government isn't going to solve the problems of government. Cancer doesn't cure cancer, folks. And folks, I don't know how many times I've had to say this. I've been saying this for so many years. I've been following this case for so many years. And yes, it does disproportionately go after Native American, Indigenous kids. There's no doubt about it. Yes, there's an increased statistical odds of alcoholism and all that kind of stuff in those communities. That somehow justifies the government coming in and stealing children. Government, the biggest murderer of all time. Government, the biggest thief and kidnapper of all time. The biggest polluter. All these things. Why do we stay remaining, apathetic and complacent to this system? It's so horrible. And pumping drugs into these children. The amount of children being dragged out of rivers, dead. I don't know. I don't know how much longer it's going to take until people wake up. But we keep pushing forward, and we keep trying to get the word out on this and press people, press politicians, confront politicians, non-violently, but confront them and tell them what they are, and tell them what they need to stop doing, and tell them what you want as an individual. Taking back your child, taking back the children that have been stolen from you, taking back your grandchildren, getting some kind of justice for your children or grandchildren or nieces or nephews or brothers or sisters being murdered and drugged to death and killed. But that's up to you as individuals. I appreciate you joining us again. for another update on this horrible complex. We will do whatever we can to continuously get the message out, but keep up the saying, CFS or fired. It's something I spoke of so many times for so many years, and we need to continue that. There's a CFS or fired group, I believe, on Facebook still, working hard to give voices to these children stolen by the government. Anyway, till next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
Like what you see here, WAM? Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so heavily demonetized and censored by YouTube as these guys come in and flag all of our content as hate speech. The shadow banning is getting really bad, guys. Also, check our Bitcoin address right here on the screen or in the description below. We really appreciate it. And of course, check us out at the Red Pill Expo 2019. Of course, the great G. Edward Griffin and so many other incredible speakers will be there. Our link for that is below as well. And we cannot forget Mike Maloney's goldsilver.com, which you can also find in the description. One of the greatest market and monetary historians out there. We really encourage everyone to check that out. But until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
I'm sure you have already changed people's minds in your young age because you're involved, and I like that.